a.m. And I will bring the meeting to order. We have an agenda before us. Are there any additions or deletions to that agenda? Councillor Christie.
If not, I'll move the agenda as presented.
Okay, we have a motion to move the agenda as presented. All those in favor? Councillor Hugo, are you online? Councillor Hugo, are you there? Okay, well, motion is carried. We pre-circulated the minutes of the May 11th regular council meeting. Are there any errors, omissions, comments? Councillor King.
My motion to approve the May 11th minutes as presented.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the minutes as presented. All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, motion is carried. We have a delegation before us, Capstone Infrastructure. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. What we'll do, I guess, right off the bat is we will introduce council, starting from my far right.
Wade Christie.
Debbie Penner.
Jerry Whitstock.
Faye McGee.
Ken King.
And we have a couple joining us through video conferencing. Mr. Keever. Mr. Hugo, are you there?
I am. Sorry, I had my volume shut off.
Okay. And if you can introduce yourselves, that would be lovely.
Jim Hugo?
Absolutely. Oh,
Go ahead. Thank you.
sorry.
Oh, go right ahead.
Okay, sorry. I wasn't sure Councilor Hugo was going to speak. So thank you, Reed Woodstock. So good morning to yourself and members of council. Thank you for letting us make a delegation this morning. So my name is Andrea Kelsel. I'm a Vice President of Development with Capstone Infrastructure. Hopefully people can hear me okay. If at any point you can't, please raise a hand. I'm joined today with Lucas Reindler, a development consultant with Bright Diamond Consulting that's working with Capstone on permitting and community engagement, as well as Megan Hunter, who's Capstone's communications manager. Hi, folks.
Well, good morning, everyone. At any time you're ready.
Perfect. So I see you have our presentation up there, so I'm just going to turn it over to the second slide. So I guess, firstly, who is Capstone? So we're a pure play independent power producer, or an IPP. We were founded in 2004 and based in Toronto, Ontario. We own and operate 29 facilities across Canada, including wind, solar, hydro, biomass, as well as natural gas. In Alberta, we're expanding our footprint primarily through the development of wind and solar projects. We currently operate a biomass plant in Whitecourt, kind of northeast of Edmonton. And then, more recently, you might have heard Capstone's name making some headlines kind of in the last few years. So in 2018, Capstone was one of the successful project bidders in the AESO's renewable electricity program. So in 2018, our Buffalo Valley project was selected as one of the winning contract holders. That project's still in the development phase. And then more recently, with our Clarestone solar project, it's currently Canada's largest operating solar facility at 132 megawatts. So it was just reached commercial operation last month. A portion of that project's actually selling its electricity and offsets directly to a corporate counterparty. It's TC Energy. So we're also involved in the development of waste heat and flare gas projects in Alberta and a little bit in Saskatchewan with Calgary-based Genalta Power. Outside of Alberta, we continue to be active in development across Canada, and kind of in the last year or so, we've also started doing work south of the border in the US. I'll just turn over to the next slide. So, as a company that owns and operates projects, we really view these as, long-term commitments to a community. A solar project, for example, will operate for at least 30 years. So what we see across the country with our operating facilities is that our facility, which are often distributed in nature throughout different municipalities, as well as our site team, become part of a community. And, this really drives Capstone's approach to building relationships with its host municipality, with its residents at the early stage in development, because we're still going to be there once the construction team comes off the site. We really attribute our success to this approach in terms of, early engagement with the local community. For our projects out east that we delivered in Ontario and Quebec and Nova Scotia, and even more recently in Alberta in the MD of Willow Creek with our Clarisum solar project. So I'll just turn over to the next slide. So, as a project developer, we do development from the siting kind of greenfield stage, but often there's a lot of acquisition activity that will also happen at all stages of development, whether it's early, late, or even operating projects. And we acquired 4 projects earlier this year in Ontario. With the Kneehill project, this is kind of an example of that, or actually our Buffalo Valley project and our Clarisum solar project that we just completed. We didn't start these projects from the initial siting stage. We acquired them from, what we often call our kind of junior developers. So they might site a project, take it through some level of permitting, but not have the financial means or technical or whatever it may be to actually complete projects, finance them, or, and often it's not strategic for companies to be the operator of a project. So as I mentioned, we acquired the Clarisum project. That was one that we acquired in late 2019. We had the AUC approval. Some of the equipment was already selected and ordered, and we kind of stepped in and completed the engineering, then ultimately constructed the project over kind of a little bit over a year. So with the Kneehill project, it's quite similar in that, as you may be aware, the project has their AUC approval. Development permits, had been issued. So, we acquired the project in March, and since then, so we've sent out a newsletter to the residents in the area and other parties that were on the stakeholder communications list. And at this stage, we've spent the last kind of 2 months or so undertaking, detailed engineering, making equipment selection, and getting ready to sign procurement contracts. And ultimately, we're looking to award issue our construction tender probably late June, early July, and be on track for starting construction kind of end of summer, likely early fall. So in terms of next steps, as I said, we're looking at finalizing our equipment design, making an update to the AUC, and continuing engagement with landowners and residents in the area to make sure that folks are clear on the proposed change. And then, following consultation that Lucas has had with folks within Kneehill County, we'll be updating our development permit and looking to start construction this fall. So I didn't want to take up too much time, just to make sure that we have lots of time to answer questions. So, happy to do so at this time.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. Are there any questions from council? Clarifications? Councillor Christie.
I'm just curious, in watching the development at Innisfail, Alberta, their panels are awfully close to the ground. Would it be, for me, it would be more successful if it was off the ground enough that cattle could be grazed underneath. I don't know if that's possible or not, but it sounds like Innisfail's coming in with either goats or sheep. So it's possible to graze underneath, but if it was higher, cattle could graze it and keep the weeds and stuff down. When I look at that infrastructure there, I can't see any mechanical way to go in there and look after weed control.
Actually, it's interesting that you mentioned that. So our Clarisum solar project, we'll actually have sheep on the site. That was really, preference of the landowner. As far as livestock go, cattle are a little bit, they weigh a lot and a little bit aggressive for for the racking for solar, so not a great fit. And goats conversely like to jump on top of them, but sheep are kind of the sweet spot. So you know, we haven't had discussions with the landowner at this stage as far as potential for bringing you know, livestock on the site, but that is something that you know, we're having at our Clarissome site for not so much weed management per se. The site will be vegetated, but for vegetation management and just kind of co-use of the lands.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from council? Councillor Hugo.
Yes, good morning. I recently spoke with a local landowner. The reason they only found out about you guys taking over from Samsung was through the AUC website. You say you consult with landowners, but you've only sent out a flyer, and he's reached out to you guys several times, and he hasn't had a one-on-one meeting. He has no idea what the engineering is going to be, any kind of what development is going to be on this property, because you guys really haven't reached out to local landowners other than this little flyer, and it really doesn't tell a hell of a lot. So are you going to try and reach out to the landowners and maybe talk to them and see what you guys have got planned in engineering? Because Samsung said they were going to have stationary solar panels. We don't have a clue what you guys are doing if you're going to do tracking. Are you planning on reaching out and meeting one-on-one with local landowners in the area?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I'll turn over to Lucas.
Yeah, sorry, Andrea. I'll let you speak on behalf of Capstone on the technology side. On the consultation side and engagement side, Councillor Hugo, I'll just let you know that we have been active. We've been making calls and leaving messages. I know it's a busy time for farmers this time of year, and as you point out, we did only send a flyer recently in early May. Of course, the transaction was only complete in late March, and we reached out to county representatives proactively in April. So there is a process we're following, and please be reassured that we have a diligent plan in place, but it does take a little bit of time. And we understand that there's lots of questions about final design. And I think, as Andrea pointed out, those decisions on the engineering side haven't been made yet. So we do want to bring clear, accurate information to everybody. And we have been reaching out and calling and leaving messages. In terms of direct feedback yet, it's only been a couple of weeks. So I admit we haven't had a lot of one-on-one conversations just yet. So that is in the plan. In terms of the technology, Andrea, do you want to speak to the process for the engineering?
Yeah, sure. So I think some of the changes that are happening, I think, you know, one thing that's kind of interesting with solar is that, you know, the module development is constantly evolving. So, you know, for example, on the Clarissome site, when it, you know, was acquired in 2019, you know, we thought that we were putting in, you know, 350 watt modules. And by the time the modules were delivered in, I guess, you know, starting last summer, so kind of August of 2020, the manufacturers in Asia were already doing 400 watt cells. So there is a little bit of rejigging of the design just because the size of the solar modules, so how many watts kind of per density, is constantly changing. So that's evolving, and we're looking at kind of optimizing a mix between some upfront engineering that we would do versus what the construction contractor is doing. So specifically on the racking, you know, that hasn't been decided yet, but kind of in progress. And, you know, we're looking to do our geotech work likely in June, I guess at this point, if it's already May 25th, which will inform a lot of those structural engineering decisions. Happy to address any follow-up.
Councillor
Hugo.
Yeah. Yes, this is actually a follow-up to Councillor Christie's question. You know, you haven't quite figured out what you'd want to do for weed control. We do have an adjacent landowner that does have goats and sheep around his area. He's very concerned that if this the solar farm goes ahead, is it going to have a security fence around it? And exactly how do you plan on keeping livestock from mixing if you do use livestock for weed control?
Definitely. So we'll for sure have us a perimeter fence around the property. So, you know, whether or not there are livestock on the lands, that's just there to make sure that, you know, there's no issues with safety on trespassing on the site. So, you know, after construction, we do have a requirement to revegetate the facility, or, you know, or the kind of the project land. So there's a lot of turnover during construction. So in early discussions with the landowner, we're likely looking at some native seed mix. So, you know, once the revegetation occurs, you know, less likelihood of weeds, because, you know, they have to be competing with the vegetation. But
Are there any other questions from council? Councilor Hugo?
Yeah, I realize during construction, we're gonna see a lot of employment, and you're putting that out for tenders. What are we looking at for long-term employment for local Kneehill County residents? Is there gonna be any, or is it we're just dealing with one or two people that will be driving out from Calgary or whichever? Are we looking at a long-term employment benefit for the municipality itself?
So for this facility, Capstone is actually going to be undertaking not just you know, operations, which, you know, you can do remotely or on site, but also the on-site maintenance. You know, from, I don't know if council's aware, but also Samsung was developing the Michichi project, so we acquired both of them. That project's a little closer to Drumheller. So we're currently exploring between Michichi, Kneehill, as well as our Clarestone site, you know, how to optimize our site operations. But you know, likely 2 or 3 kind of full-time contractors for, you know, the Michichi and Kneehill sites, or sorry, Kneehill and Michichi sites. But yeah, haven't identified, you know, where they'll be living, but likely not in Calgary. It's a little bit of a drive, but you know, I would expect them to be regionally.
Yeah, from
question.
I'll just add to.
You guys have been. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add to that briefly. Of course, the tax benefits, which you know, are substantial, depending on, you know, the operating budget of the county. But there are substantial tax benefits, and of course, the employment opportunities during construction are substantial as well, as you pointed out, Councillor Hugo.
How long have you, since you've only been in operation since 2004, has there been any long-term studies on returning the land to viable crop? Or is this basically, we're looking at this plan is going to be a desolate piece of property after the 30 years or 25 years after the solar farm is removed?
So really for any facility, specifically in Alberta, you know, but generally speaking, you know, our lease agreements have an obligation to remove infrastructure at the end of the life of the project. It's usually down to a meter, basically making sure that you're below the kind of organic, kind of live layer of soil. So, you know, you continue with the prior, you know, agricultural operations were kind of prior to a project. In Alberta, there's actually more robust, you know, reclamation requirements for renewable energy projects that Alberta Environment Parks put in place maybe 2 or 3 years ago now. So part of our pre-construction surveys, in addition to the geotech, is actually going to be looking at, you know, what soil exists, what are the depths, and what is the distribution on the site, and also what vegetation exists. And that gets documented, and there's a requirement to make sure that that's reintroduced, you know, at the end of the life of the project. As I mentioned, for a solar project, you know, we expect it to operate for, you know, at least 30 years, if not longer, and often for renewable energy projects, because you have that, you know, renewable resource, you usually see, you know, redevelopment of the land, you know, kind of at the end of that life. So, you know, we're doing some work in the US where, you know, projects were built in the 90s, and they're now at the stage where, you know, you're taking down the old infrastructure and actually putting up, you know, newer equipment.
And adding on that, I'll give you one example. Andrea, I'll add to that in Pincher Creek, the Cowley Ridge wind farm, owned and operated by TransAlta, was decommissioned 2 years ago. That was the first commercial scale wind farm. I know we're talking wind and solar, but that's the oldest commercial renewable generation project in Alberta, and it was redeveloped and is now being permitted by TransAlta for new generation today as we speak. So I think that's a classic example of the market structure in Alberta encouraging, you know, commercial solutions where these projects can be re-implemented.
So actually what we're seeing is after the lifespan of solar or wind, you're basically going back to solar or wind instead of returning it to producing cropland.
That's probably the case here, and ultimately, I understand the concern some people have. You know, I think you're alluding to loss of farmland, and that's a legitimate concern in many areas in Alberta. I think in this case, from our perspective, buying into the project, the AUC has determined that it's in the public interest for renewable generation, and I know there has to be a balance there in the community and in the province for protecting farmland and also implementing renewable energy. It's interesting to note from our perspective also that we also have to deal and manage stakeholder expectations from Alberta Environment and Parks, and they would actually like to see this kind of land be put back into native prairie at the end of the life. That's something that they would like to see. Of course, it's all up to the landowner what they want to do with their land. But it just gives an example of all the different competing land uses that, you know, land pressures that all landowners face.
That's kind of strange that you mentioned native prairie. So instead of going on to viable farmland, how come solar and wind doesn't look at going on to native prairie right away and returning it back to the native prairie?
Because that's not allowed. The government has stated that
you want to turn it back to native prairie at the very end, and it's never been native prairie for probably 100 and some years. It's been cultivated farmland.
Yeah, you are right, sir. I don't disagree. I think the point is just that different stakeholders view it differently, and from a habitat perspective, biologists would say that the native grass is of much higher value ecologically than farmland. But I agree from a farming perspective, you are 100% right. It is more valuable financially and for the landowner as farmland.
Granted, with native prairies, I don't think you'll be able to find the native prairie grass seeds anymore anyways. And if you did, it would cost you probably a couple million to reseed it. The other question, you guys have been in business. You have other solar farms out there. Are there adjacent acreage owners right next to your solar farms, and have they seen their property values decrease because of the development?
So I'm certainly, like, say for Clarestone, for example, there are a few residents in the area. You know, we've not seen an impacts on the property values or kind of sale volumes, but, you know, more broadly, across Canada, you know, there have been studies done more so on wind. There's been a lot more wind development in the country, where, you know, there's demonstrated, especially for, you know, farmlands where there's not an impact, you know, on the land itself. You know, you're not having to deal with, you know, any environmental impacts that, you know, just because we're on the adjacent land, you know, it's not affecting the quality of the soil or any of the like that, you know, ultimately is driving a lot of the land values.
No, but I'm not asking that question. I'm asking, there's a couple of acreage owners within less than a quarter mile from where you plan on building the solar farm. Are their property values decreasing? Because if they want to do, let's say, move off the acreage and move to a town, are they seeing their property value decrease because there is a solar array right next to them?
So speaking from, you know, like I said, more so on wind. I think there's been less studies done in Canada for solar. You know, statistically looking at the volume and the numbers, you know, there hasn't been an impact that's been seen.
Okay, all right, thank you. I think that's pretty well all I have to ask for today.
Councillor Penner.
Thank you, the three of you, for joining us this morning. I wonder if any of you have had the opportunity to actually visit the site.
We have not, strictly speaking, because of the pandemic right now. We have a site team that's, you know, been in Lethbridge and kind of Clarestone area for the last year and a half. So, you know, they've gone up to site, but, you know, I'm currently in Ontario and haven't been on an airplane since last year. So hoping that with vaccination and numbers getting down, that likely look at traveling this summer. We have a wind farm in construction in Saskatchewan, and just a lot of active development activity in Alberta as well.
Okay, thank
And
you.
if I might add to that, it would be just for council's knowledge, a big portion of the project team, the consultants and some of the experts, the technical experts, geotech, environment, those type of people, those are consultants that are continuous from the Samsung project. So we do have a continuity of some knowledge of the site and people that have worked on the site for a number of years. So that's something we've tried to draw from. Of course, we've only this team has only been active on the project for a few months, so we're trying to get up to speed.
Okay, are there any other questions from council to the delegation, Capstone Infrastructure? Okay. Oh, Glenn, is that your hand up? Councillor Keever? Or you just putting?
Scratching my eye.
Oh. Okay, sorry about that. All right, well, I would like to thank Andrea, Lucas, and Megan for attending, well, video conferencing in with us through the council meeting. Thanks for the information that you've provided. I don't see anyone here at council looking to ask any more questions, so thank you so much, and we will continue with our agenda. Have a great day.
Great, thank you very much. I look forward
Thank you,
to
Reed. Thank
being
you,
able to meet
council.
folks in person at some point.
Okay,
Thank
have a
you.
great
Take
day
care,
in
folks.
Ontario.
Thanks.
Good day to you too. Bye now.
Okay, all right, we will go on to our next agenda item, 5.1.1. Welcome, Ms. Hazelton. And anytime you're ready, Barb.
All right. Got a couple policies to bring to you today.
See that?
So I'll clean up and review. So as part of council's ongoing review of current policies, and in particular policies that have not been reviewed for a period of 4 years, and these are just over that 4 year, we're bringing some of these back to you. So the first one that we're bringing back is a subdivision development fees and refunds policy review. The original policy, and you will see it attached in the package, was very limited and was missing some pieces. So we've substantially changed the policy. So we didn't do a red letter version so that you could see changes because we did so much too. We basically created a new one. So as the old one was missing some of those key requirements in policies, so there was no purpose, guidelines, or procedures, which are a critical piece of any policy. So this policy provides a standard that will ensure consistency in how applicants and developers are treated. Administration also did not have any direction for application refunds, which has now been included in this draft. And again, this is very typical across most municipalities, is the opportunity if somebody withdraws an application very soon after it was submitted that they can get a refund. So we did include a specific section just for that. And again, we tried to do that based on the amount of internal work that was completed prior to the request. So this gives specific guidance to the planning department to ensure that any refunds or partial refunds are consistently applied to all applicants. And so I don't know if you had any specific questions related to this policy.
Councillor Christie.
I'm just curious, how often do you give refunds?
You know, we don't very often, but we have done a few, and typically it's somebody withdraws it before we even, like they submit it and then they've withdrawn it. Or we've had a couple where the safety code construction costs that they thought were going to be, when they actually got it back from, it was a little bit less. So then we refunded a portion of safety codes. But yeah, we do on occasion, but not very often. As you will note, if anybody wants to have the fees waived, they have to go through council. So if it's a fee that we require, subdivision endorsement or development, and for some reason they're claiming they need to waive that, that's a decision you guys would make at that point. We're just basically looking at the fact that we will not process anything without the full fee paid. We won't begin it. And then if somebody withdraws prior to us doing any work on it, they could have a full refund. If we're partially through that process, then as you can see in the policy, we have different percentages that they could have back depending on how far we're in.
Are there any other questions for Ms. Hazelton? Deputy Reeve McGee.
I'd like to move that we approve Policy 5.1, Subdivision and Development Fees and Refunds Policy as presented.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion to approve 5.1 the way it's written. Is there any discussion to that motion? Seeing not, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thanks, Barb.
You bet.
And we'll go on to 5.1.2.
Okay, so this is subdivision general conditions review. And again, this is part of that ongoing review. We have switched how we've presented this policy, and we've separated it into two sections for ease of use. Standard conditions, which are applied to all subdivision approvals, and a list of other conditions that are only included if applicable. Administration has also included several other conditions specifically relating to reserves. We're required to be very specific at the time of approval when it comes to municipal reserves. We've also included some conditions relating to environmental reserves, reserve easements, and/or conservation reserves, as we have utilized a couple of these conditions since this policy was previously reviewed. And some of those are changes that were done in the Municipal Government Act. Conservation reserves is something newer that would have been added since the last look at this policy. Administration has also removed a couple conditions that would be more applicable for development. It should be noted that this list does not need to be exhaustive. The Municipal Planning Commission can always add a condition that would be unique for a specific application. This does, however, allow us to be consistent in the conditions that we typically use. So we do pull them from this list and incorporate them, and quite a lot of them you will have seen many, many times, I'm sure, through sitting on the Municipal Planning Commission. But again, don't know if you had any questions.
Does council have any questions for Ms. Hazelton? Councillor Christie.
I'll make the motion to approve Policy 5-8, Subdivision and General Conditions as presented.
All righty, we have a motion before us to approve Policy 5.8 as presented. Is there any discussion to that motion? Seeing not, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, that'd be carried. Okay, next agenda item, 5.1.3. Welcome back, Ms. Hazelton.
Yes. So this is a new policy that you haven't seen before, but we have been chatting about this for a while. So what I've drafted for you is one that's basically a straw dog. It doesn't need to be approved as presented today. You certainly can do that if you're satisfied with it, but there's some specific pieces that we wanted to chat about. So development agreements may be required of an applicant developer as per the Municipal Government Act. Specifically, when an applicant is required to upgrade or construct any infrastructure that will be transferred to the county once complete. Typically, the agreements themselves are a function of administration. However, currently they are being brought to council for consideration. This policy allows administration to draft and execute these agreements in a consistent manner, which clarifies the process for all applicants and developers. Since this policy will have council oversight, it will not be essential for administration to bring the agreements to council in the future. This also ensures that the same rules apply to all the developers, whether local or otherwise. Since Kneehill County does not currently have a policy specifically related to development agreements, this has been drafted for discussion purposes. Council feedback will be incorporated into the policy, which will be brought back to future council meeting for approval. Specific feedback requested. So the security required should be based on the level of risk that council is comfortable with if the developer does not complete the construction as required. Administration is proposing a graduated scale for the percentage required for security, as the risk level would be considerably lower for a small project versus a large project. The numbers provided in the policy are a starting point for discussion purposes. To provide some context, someone that applies for a country residential development, which is 5 lots or more, would be required to put in a service road. Under the current GMSS policy, the service road must be paved and has to meet a minimum standard. The paving requirement is new, and to date, it has not been utilized. These projects are typically initiated by local landowners. Larger projects will carry a higher level of risk if not completed to the appropriate standard. It should be noted that any deficiencies in infrastructure must be addressed before a final acceptance certificate is signed off on by our municipal engineer and the transfer is made to the municipality. So, and there's a couple, we're all aware of like the potential upgrades that a large developer would have to do. In the last 5 years, and I've had lots of conversations with Brad, there have been, I think there's been about 7 single-family developments on an undeveloped road where they've had to upgrade a portion of that road. And so there are a bit of challenges with that because that is our lowest standard of road, but as soon as it's upgraded, it does have the potential to have more development going along those roads, which may wind up being a road that isn't necessarily able to service all that additional development. So those are some conversations that we have been having. And again, at what point council is confident that the risk level is not going to be problematic. And in those cases where it's been to a single residence, we have not taken security. Under this policy, we would be taking security, and engineering would have to be done. That has been another area that can be problematic. When a municipality does any road work that requires upgrading, you do have to have engineers. And so it does become a problem if we allow a landowner to do it without doing that, or the potential Alberta environment approvals that might be necessary. And so we are trying to make sure that everybody, if it's a road being built and we're going to take it over, it's being built to the same standard that we would have to do it if we were doing that road as well. So, and what I did do as well, this doesn't seem to be working, but I do have a PowerPoint. So what I did try to do is go through a bit of the security, and I've also provided a bit of what some of the other municipalities around us are doing, just to give you some comparisons, and then any questions we're happy to do. Most of this information, it was taken from a legal course that we took, planning law, and so just to give you some ideas on the different types of security, irrevocable letter of credit is by far the most preferred. It does need to be issued by a charter bank, and it should provide for automatic renewal. Usually it's payable, or should be payable on demand, and should be redeemable if it's not removed. Typically they're good for 12 months or a year, and then they are renewed. And so those are some of the things we need to look at. Security deposit cash is almost as good as a letter of credit as long as the funds are held by the municipality under acceptable terms. It is, however, considered property of the developer and may be subject to seizure or garnish. It is considered an asset of the developer if he goes bankrupt. So those are just things to keep in mind. If it is a check, you do have to catch it. You should not be holding on to checks. A pledge agreement is something that is encouraged that a municipality enter with that party, and it needs to be registered as a security interest, and that bumps you in a priority list if there is an issue. Interest can go back to the developer, but you will see from what I present with other municipalities that typically that doesn't happen. And again, should not take post-dated checks. A performance bond is not recommended. It is weak security. Generally, it does not cover the initial construction cost. It covers for additional costs incurred up to a maximum amount set. It will not automatically pay out on demand. It is not an insurance policy. Bonding companies can be very challenging to deal with. And it does require that all actions taken under the development agreement are subject to prior notice to the bonding company. So they have to be involved in any enforcement as you go through it if required. It will require the municipality to adhere to bonding company's requirements, or you risk losing their coverage. And they will often not take action unless there's been a clear, unequivocal breach by the developer. And generally, they will take a personal guarantee from the principal of the corporation or some other security on the corporation. The bonding company will evaluate the claim of the beneficiary of the bond, similar in this regard to an insurer, and they may be sympathetic to the developer's position. So again, it's very weak. We're not proposing that in our policy at all, and most municipalities are now staying away from these. A subdivision bond is a little bit different, and it is something that is becoming more common. It generally will cover the full cost of constructing improvements. The bonding company, however, will require a lot more information up front in order to assess the risks that they're getting into, and it does provide better protection than a performance bond. And the other option that you will see on occasion is mortgage security. Generally, this is the weakest form of security. It requires enforcement against the assets of the developer. It's very risky to a municipality where land prices fluctuate or in a bankruptcy. So before foreclosing on a mortgage, the municipality does have to file a lawsuit against the developer. And often you will have multiple creditors fighting for the priority in the same lands, and it can take years, and recovery is not guaranteed. So again, not one that we've included. Just to give you a little bit of idea, Rocky View County, they've waived the security for private, so if there's no transfer of the infrastructure and there's no maintenance required by the county, they don't require security. They put a $3 million max for development agreements relating to industrial, commercial, or institution. There is no max for other developments, so largely that leaves your multi-lot subdivisions because the other ones seem to be covered. They do a 5,000 an acre security for pre-endorsed work. So if they're doing a multi-lot subdivision, and again, they want to start selling before they actually have the endorsement on the subdivision, then they take security for that. They also take it for stripping and grading, and again, that's prior to all of the pieces being in place. They do take security for approaches. Cost is specific to the surface. Not something in the past we've only done that years and years ago when somebody wanted their subdivision endorsed and the weather wasn't conducive to putting that approach in. So we would have them pay for that approach, give us the cash, and then once the approach was constructed after the endorsement of the subdivision, we would give that cash back. We haven't done that forever, 20-some years. But that was the only reason we would ever do that, and it was a quick turnaround. The other thing that both Rocky View and Red Deer do is if a developer's had 5+ development agreements with no incidents with the county, then they only charge a 25% minimum for security. The minimum is $150,000. If the developer has 2+ development agreements, then it's a 50% minimum, and it's $150,000 or 50% security, $150,000 minimum. And they will also use references from other municipalities. If it's a developer that's done work in southern Alberta, they will consider references as well. If the developer has less than 2 development agreements under their belt with them and 100%, then it's 100% security with that minimum of $150,000. If they're a problem developer that they've had incidents with, then it's 150 minimum, 150 security and a minimum of $200,000. And then typically they'll retain that 10 to 15%. So when they retain, we're talking about the difference between the construction completion certificate. The developer has to maintain that for a year before they get their final acceptance certificate. So that's when the retaining 10 to 15% takes place with municipalities. With Red Deer County, they have 2+ development agreements with references. They do a 25% security for urban multi-lot. If they don't have any history with that developer, they'll take 50% on an urban multi-lot. With a rural multi-lot, they will take 100% security. All subdivisions, 125% if they want to sell lots prior to that construction completion. So again, they will do that. If a developer doesn't, then they wouldn't take that security. And again, they retain 15%. Camrose County does cost sharing. The developer pays 25% and they will cost share that road. However, they will not make any commitment to fund service for single multi-lot residential, commercial, or industrial. So when it comes to other services that provide, they don't do any cost sharing. Stetler does cost sharing. It is available, but the other thing they do is a developer can pay them 100% security and then the county will upgrade or build the road themselves, but they don't guarantee the timeline that that will happen. Lacombe County does a security of $10,000 per kilometer of road. Flagstaff does cost sharing, 50%, maximum $15,000 on a single family residential, and a multi-lot, 100% security is taken. And I could not find any information for Mountain View, Starland, or Lethbridge, so just to give you that. Questions?
Council have any questions for Ms. Hazelton? What's your thoughts on the security recommendation? Well, I guess it's not really a recommendation, but it's your thoughts.
Yeah, so item 10 in the policy is how I've done it more as a range. So that, and again, this is to provide consistency. The numbers used were just used for discussion purposes, and I'm not, like I said, I'm not offended if you guys want to change anything. It's really dependent on the level of risk council is agreeable to on a smaller project. You may have, for some of the roads, just to give you some context, some of the roads that were recently done to a single family were probably in that $8,000 to $15,000 range cost to them. But again, that was without engineering, which we now ask for. The engineering doesn't mean you have to have an engineer on site oversight, but it does mean there might need to be engineered drawings depending on what that road is like to begin with. And so again, that gives you kind of a ballpark, and you did do cost sharing on some of those. I think when Mr. Bolton did his was probably more like 60 grand, and he did have engineered oversight on that piece that's out by the river that was done. And so that's kind of the ballpark we're seeing on some of these short ones. The costs that we've seen on the single family would definitely increase with engineering. So that would give you an idea of, they would mostly fall into that A range, and then the level of security would be about 25%. So that would give you an idea of what we would be asking. Typically a local developer or local landowner, not always, but typically these are local. And then we've kind of just moved it up from there.
I also see that for multi-lot subdivisions, the new policy states that those roads should be paved.
Yep.
Even if the road adjacent, or the, I guess the
That they're
municipal
coming
road
off
is
of?
gravel?
Yeah, so under the GMSS, which is a policy I can't change, we're actually looking at that policy right now, and we are going to try to make it a little easier to wade through than what it currently is set up. But that is how that policy is. So if somebody does come in, it would be paved. And that actually, Brad's in favor of that because of the fact, like the one that we have that they're dealing with isn't wide enough. The bulb doesn't allow turnaround for the grader, fire trucks, those types of things. So the standard has to be bigger when it comes to the bulb and the width of those roads. And then it's probably a lot easier for plowing and all those types of things to have that paved in. The other thing that council needs to consider whenever we're doing these, and we do have to come back to you that, so that you agree that this road can be upgraded prior to, because it becomes part of that operating budget. So it's another road added. It may not be convenient for the grader to get to it. It may not be convenient for the snow plow, depending on where it's located. It's additional gravel, sand, plowing, all those types of things. So there is an increase to Brad's operating budget, and I would be remiss in not saying that. He's not available today, otherwise he would be here to fight for his own stuff. But it's just something that needs to be, we have to be cognizant of as we're doing it. The construction completion, typically how that works, we do have one that is, we've done that's more extreme than this, but typically, once we have gotten that construction completion, it's usually a year before they get that final acceptance unless something goes very awry. If something goes awry within that time, they have to fix it. And they have to do all the maintenance in that, between the CCC and the FAC. The maintenance is done by the developer, and then once the FAC is issued, we take ownership back of that infrastructure. So that is typically how it works, and that's kind of how we've built it into here.
Yeah, my comment was that it would have to be a higher grade of road if we're gonna look to put pavement on it, so.
Yeah, yes, absolutely, and they would have to have engineering,
Yep,
so.
okay. Counselor Petter.
Just further to what Reeve Woodstock was talking about, that was going to be my question to do with country residentials. So it does not matter if it comes off a paved road or if it comes off a gravel road, where the GMSS is saying that it should be paved.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's what we have currently.
Is there any other input from council or questions for Councilor King?
So when you were talking about the roads that we have done up to this point for single-family stuff, you said somewhere between 8 and 15
Yeah, I think that's.
without engineering.
Without. I think we've looked at them from an operations perspective to see whether or not something would be triggered, but we have added to the master rates now that an engineering review is required. So we take a fee and it goes straight to our engineers, and they determine whether or not there's going to be other approvals necessary, whether Alberta Environment would be involved. And so they're actually doing kind of an initial review of that would go to the developer, and then the engineer, their engineer would draft accordingly. But we would not get involved if they have to have Alberta Environment approvals. That's on them. We aren't going to get involved in that. Part of the reason, like under the Water Act, and you guys probably are a bit aware of this, but there's pieces under the Water Act that we can be personally liable for. You aren't protected under a municipality, and they can come after you individually. So if you're aware of something, or you are helpful in doing something that goes around some of that approval process, it can get very costly to an individual. So that's the other thing, that from an operations perspective, we want to protect everybody that works within the county so that stuff is being done consistently with what's required in all legislation.
So just, was there any idea that Brad or somebody had as to what that additional cost might be by adding the engineering component? So if it was, say, 15 without, would it be double that with, or?
You know, it depends on the road, the length of the road, and the other thing, like he said too, you're not talking about engineering oversight, it's engineering plans that have to be submitted. So if it's approvals through Alberta Environment, then that completely is probably a deal breaker for some local people, because those can be quite costly to obtain. But if it's just the engineering plans, Brad didn't think that was astronomical, but he didn't really give me a ballpark, because really it's really going to depend on what's already there for base and the length and what surface we're requiring and the width we're going to require depending on the use.
Okay, so if it's not engineering oversight, it's just a review of the plan, then who takes the responsibility on oversight for that road prior to it coming into our inventory?
Our engineers. Our engineers would be party to that. They would be the ones that would go out and verify it meets the CCC, or the construction completion. And then they also would be the ones that would sign off on the final acceptance certificate on our behalf. So they would look at any of the work being done, whether there's geotechnical work or any of that. So it would always be engineer to engineer in that
Okay,
regard.
so that engineering costs that would occur at that point in time, is that being billed back to the developer, or is that something that we would absorb? I guess the reason I'm asking that question is, it sounds to me like potentially there's a cost of engineering that's going to be incurred by the county that's not necessarily being returned to the developer. So
Yep.
in my mind, it's one of the things that if we're getting this engineering component that's done in terms of the planning, when we get to the final completed road and it has to be inspected to make sure that it meets the design component, there's a cost that's going to be incurred. Who's carrying that cost?
Right, and that's something I think we would have to accommodate in master rates. I don't know if you have any comments. 14 does talk a little bit about that third-party review, but that third-party review is on the upfront cost as well, that it's a realistic, whatever because the security is based on the cost of construction. So if we look at the cost of construction submitted by their engineer and we feel it's like, not quite sure you're going to get it for that, we can have that option to have that third-party review. Currently, that is our cost, and we have borne that with one developer that we have. I don't know if you want to comment, Mike?
To jump in there, what is fairly normal is the cost of producing, so when you go into the CCC, is the cost of producing, say, the final survey. So you get an engineered plan of where the developer is saying, this is what I'm going to build. And then we do a review of that plan, both our staff and, depending on the nature of the development, likely the engineers. And that cost is on us, because we're looking after our interests there. So we don't recoup that, to my knowledge, through, our rates aren't going to be high enough to recoup that. When then the developer, we sign off on it, and the developer goes out and theoretically that's what they build. And so when they're done their construction, the cost is usually onto the developer to then say, here's, to get a surveyed plan done, or basically an as-built, and bring it back to us and say, this is what I built. And then we go through it, and I say we, but that's where our third-party engineering comes into play as well. They go through it to make sure that they've built the correct things, or they've built what they said they were going to build. And if they have, then the warranty period, we sign off and the warranty period can begin. But the cost of that review, so the developer's got to, I'd have to check our exact policies that exist right now, but it should be on the developer to provide that as-built at their cost, but the review of it is ours.
I guess, the reason I'm asking the question is that realistic that that cost should be ours, or should that cost go to the actual developer? I know it's due diligence on our part, but the due diligence wasn't initiated by us, the requirement for that. And so I'm just wondering if that's something that we should be looking at or considering as part of the cost of the development of those roads, is that if we incur engineering costs as a result of their request, that we, as a county, shouldn't necessarily carry those costs. I guess that's what I'm getting at. And I don't know if that's reasonable or not.
The as-built is covered under 18, just for information, and then,
I guess part of the reason I'm asking these questions is I really don't have a clue of what those costs might be to us, right? So for us to do the reviews before construction and afterwards, we're requiring them now, like the pre-engineering review. I have no idea what that's going to cost us. So perhaps, if it was a couple $100, that's not very much. But if it's, $5,000, $10,000, then that's a lot of money. And so the question is if the individual is developing a road allowance to allow them to create a single-family residence or a multi-lot development, is it reasonable that the county should carry those costs or not? And so I guess I would need more information on what kind of costs would be incurred if that had to happen before I'd say, just the road cost itself.
absolutely. And we can come back with some additional information. We'll make sure Brett's here next time.
I think the oversight would ultimately come down to, is this road built to the specs that it was supposed to be built? So I don't know how much engineering work would be required to inspect something that was supposed to be built to standard. I mean, it's either a yes or a no. It's either built to standard or it's not. I don't know if I'm correct on that assumption either.
No. Well, and we'll follow up. Like, as I said, this is discussion purpose is just to kind of see where you guys want to land on some of these pieces, but we'll definitely come back with some more information on that.
Yes, go ahead, Mike.
And it's just to pick up on what Barb said, and she's identified, that's really what we're looking for in this one, is a feedback around, you know, are we on the right path here as we bring this back to council? But yeah, that's information that we can dig up. It's going to be a little bit different from development to development. So what you're going to get back is not a, you know, it always costs this much. It's going to be, you know, on average, it's about this. It's going to be that type of cost that we bring back. If council wants to look at that, then administratively, in preparation for that next discussion, when we bring that back, we can have that information, as well as, you know, if there's any other issues that tie in, whether there's any legal issues, or how council might even entertain that discussion, if that's going to be a change in the master rates bylaw or what that looks like.
I did not see that reflected in the other policies that I read, but that doesn't mean it's not in their master rates, which I didn't pull. So we can definitely do some more homework on that.
Councillor Christie.
I guess my question, I'm gonna use Saddle Up Estates as a example. The crescent that goes in and out of there, does that come into our inventory, or is that?
Yeah, it is, but that one has, yes.
Yeah.
It's never been registered, and so it sits alone, but we have taken it.
So we're responsible for snow removal
Yeah.
and maintenance and the liability of that road and everything that goes with it.
Yeah.
Okay, that doesn't make me real comfortable.
Are there any other questions from council? Councillor King.
I guess, again, not so much question, but continued comment along the line of thinking. I mean, if this is a road that ends up in our inventory, this is different than somebody's private driveway. Like, I mean,
Absolutely.
you could have a dirt trail if you want, but if you're building a road that's going to come into our inventory and potentially might have other development on that road, to me, there needs to be a higher level of due diligence here. And again, I'm very interested in what that cost of that due diligence would be. So, yeah, I guess I'm looking for additional information.
Yeah.
Like, to me, you just don't go drive a road and say, well, it's built to standards. In my mind, there's possibly some coring or whatever has to happen to ensure that it's built properly, it's been packed and graded, et cetera, et cetera. So,
And these are typically roads in our current inventory, but usually as dirt roads or substandard. And the other challenge, and Brad raised this, is oil field development. They upgrade a lot of dirt roads. They throw a lot of gravel on, and all of a sudden people think it's a gravel road, and it's not. It's just a dirt road with gravel. And so that, again, when they're doing upgrades or upgrading roads, they're gonna find themselves in the same situation, where if you're actually gonna upgrade the road, you're gonna be doing it like everyone else. And so those types of things are challenging for them, because then people just assume, well, it's a gravel road, we need more gravel. Well, it's not. It's a dirt trail that oil field has made more navigable for all season. Yeah, so those are things that we have to take into consideration as well. So that's the other piece that Brad raised, is because they have always done that everywhere. They've gone in and tried to make things upgraded roads. If it's been a gravel road and they've upgraded or done work to, that usually has been a different standard, but it's the dirt trails that have been the most problematic, because there's definitely nothing. No base work is done usually.
Go ahead, Mr. Hogan.
And part of the conversation that the council's happening, and Barb's referenced the general municipal servicing standards a couple of times. That's also a review that we have going internally right now. So that policy is going to be coming back to council for any recommended changes. And that's really the one that outlines the purpose of that one is to outline all the standards we have. So when we're saying that the road is built to standard, it's that policy that says what that standard is. It's that one that tells you, are we going to require every internal road for a multi-lot subdivision is paved? What are we talking about the turning radiuses for the bulbs? How far off the quarter line are those bulbs located? how close to a quarter line can an approach be, et cetera, et cetera. There's many, many things in there that span not just roads, but you're looking at all the other departments too. So there's, correct me if I'm wrong, Barb, but I think one of the areas we identified is that there's probably some fire infrastructure things in there that we need to beef up.
Yep.
So there are, it outlines all those things, and that's a related process to this. And so when that review comes in, it's really that policy and those standards that review is being conducted to. So are the turning radiuses of the intersections and approaches, are they built correctly based on the zoning and those sorts of things? So all that review is done, and when you get into things like compaction testing and things like that, those are outlined in, normally those are outlined in a policy like that as well.
They
So
are
if,
in there.
yeah, so if you're demanding that there be subsurface compaction tests or just surface tests, but either way, you're setting that standard in there as to what those need to be and what they need to be to pass. So in other places, we have gone back and had developers actually rip up a road that they've put in because their tests failed. You do the same thing with sidewalks. If you want a certain density of the concrete and the contractor or developer doesn't meet that, I've seen them have to rip up sidewalks and re-pour. But it's that other policy that outlines the details of that. And really, when you do this waiving, that just comes back to that policy. So in the course of the discussion, when we're talking about those other things, that policy is coming your way. We're just in the process of doing some internal review and recommendations around it now.
Councillor King.
And I guess, I guess in my mind, there has to be that kind of policy sitting in the background, but the real question for me is, if we're going to develop a policy like this and we're going to require some of those things to happen, at whose cost? And if it's going to be at our cost, I'd like to know at what cost to the county. And if that cost is something that we don't think is fair for the county necessarily to carry, I think then it needs to be built into the policy where the developer has to carry that cost. And so that's where I'm going.
Any thoughts on
Councillor
this?
Kiever.
On multi-housing developments, is it always that we have to take over the road, or can that road just be left as a private laneway? And, then they could build it to any standard they want if it just stayed as a private laneway.
I do think it will come back on the county when the complaints and snow plowing, like if there's not an association to help with some of those costs of doing the plowing and the grading and the gravel and whatever maintenance might be necessary, obviously a private party may not do the same standard level that the municipality would do. And so I do think that's problematic. Not to say that it can't happen, but then I do think usually when those things happen, it would be more under an association. I don't know if you comment.
I think Barb's covered most of it. Is usually when you see that, you're looking at like a bare land condo type of development, that internal road is owned by the association or by the community. When in a bare land condo setup, technically there aren't necessarily property lines. You own a share of the overall thing. So one of the issues that we normally have are municipalities, not just Kneehill, but they come back is that road transfers to the municipality, so the municipality can guarantee that future access, and it's not left to a group of 5 or 10 landowners to try and figure out and coordinate. It's just done in ensuring that they all have proper access and that they don't need to squabble over it, or that one person's going to try and commandeer it or do anything like that, right, as it's taken out of there. But in instances where there are condo associations, those are usually done to provide enhanced services, or in the case of a bare land condo, that they would be responsible for the internal roadway. So if that was something, a bare land condo or a mobile home park might be another example where there's an internal road that we don't have.
Yeah, I think in a country residential scenario, I think we would be remiss not to make sure that that road wasn't good enough to handle emergency equipment or school buses.
Yes.
School buses maybe not so important, but emergencies, fire, ambulance, I think we would have to make sure that that road is
Yep.
built to the standard where they can go down it.
Yeah, and that's absolutely correct, is there is, in all of those examples, the one common element is there is one overseeing party that has responsibility for it. So in terms of the county roads, that's the county, and so you're not trying to place responsibility for for a road on one landowner out of 5. The county does that and goes that route. In a Bearland condo or a condo association, you've got the condo board that is the overarching responsibility. In a mobile home park, you've got the park owners that are the overseeing responsibility. So there's, in all those instances, one common theme to guarantee all of those elements is that it comes back to one entity has responsibility.
Are there any other questions or comments or concerns from council?
Any feedback on the security ranges per se?
Personally, I like that idea, but that's just me. What's council's thoughts? Councillor King.
I guess I have a question. In here, you have different types of security that you would consider acceptable, and yet in your presentation, some of those securities that you were talking about, you thought maybe would be problematic. So do we want to just specify the ones that we're most comfortable with and leave it at that?
Absolutely, you can. I left out the bonds and the mortgage. It's all either cash or irrevocable letter of credit. And I just think you need to be aware with the cash that it is still considered an asset of the developer. And so if we want to remove those, I know Rocky View does leave those in. And I'm not sure, can't remember with Red Deer.
Well, I guess my question is if it's not considered, if it's considered an asset still of the developer, therefore, if they get into trouble, that's an asset that can be taken back without any help for us in the future, right? So
Yep.
is that a type of security that we want to take? And
Yep. Totally valid. We can leave it at a irrevocable letter of credit. Take the others out.
you know, again, I'm just asking if we're not happy with those types of security, why would we suggest that we want to take them?
I would agree. Any other thoughts, concerns, questions? If not, what are council's wishes? You've got enough information going forward?
I think so.
Ms. Hazelton?
We'll make the amendments and we'll come back with some additional information on the engineering costs and what that potentially could look like on the sign-offs for the FACs, and give you guys a little bit more information and what potentially somebody might be looking at for engineering. Yeah.
Councillor King.
And I'd make the motion that we accept the policy 5.2 discussion as information.
Okay. We shall wait for that to come up on screen. If you could share that on. Okay, Counselor King may move that council receive for information policy 5-2 and direct administration to bring back to a future council meeting. Is that the motion you would like to see?
That sounds very good. I'm quite happy with
Alrighty.
that. Thank you.
So we have a motion on screen. Is there any discussion to that motion? Seeing not, I will call the question. And again, for those, I will read the motion. Councillor King moved that council receive for information policy 5-2 and direct administration to bring back to a future council meeting. That is the motion on screen. We are going to vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Oh, in favor? Okay, that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, Barb. Let's go for a 10, 15-minute recess. Our next agenda item, 5.3.1, Ag Service Board and Parks. Welcome Shelby, and anytime you're ready.
Thank you and good morning. So the item I have here for you today is the Horseshoe Canyon Focus Group recommendations from the April 20th Committee of the Whole meeting. So there is a recommended motion there, and I'll go through that once I go through the background and the discussion. So at the April 20th Committee of the Whole meeting, the final recommendations from the Horseshoe Canyon Focus Group were presented to Council, and it was recommended that Council approve the Horseshoe Canyon Focus Group report and the presentation. So the final recommendations from the focus group were presented at the Committee of the Whole meeting by the focus group facilitators as well as 2 committee member co-presenters. The presentation outlined the recommendations from the Horseshoe Canyon Focus Group recommendations report, which has also been included in the meeting package. And the recommendations were finalized with the framework of the following key considerations. So they looked at positive visitor experience, economic benefit, and responsible management. And additionally, as is noted in the attached report, the committee arrived at the common starting point that all decisions about initiatives should be assessed using the questions of, does the initiative preserve the spirit of place at Horseshoe Canyon? Does the initiative sustain and protect the natural state of Horseshoe Canyon? And is the initiative economically and financially feasible and sustainable over time? So the group thoroughly reviewed and discussed the strategies that were presented in the Horseshoe Canyon Master Plan, and recommended strategies from the focus group were organized into 3 categories. So those were strategies to consider first, and some of those included improving signage and wayfinding throughout the canyon, looking at upgrading the washroom facilities, collaborating with the Nature Conservancy of Canada and other adjacent landowners, enhancing the day use area, and looking at operating the site, staffing it with on-site ambassadors. And then as well, strategies to consider next. And so some of those were implementing paid parking at the canyon, developing trails around the canyon rim, encouraging private sector opportunities that ensure a reasonable return on investment for the county, and collaborating with nearby and regional tourism locations. And then the final category of recommended strategies was strategies to consider later, if at all. And some of those were allowing a diversity of overnight experiences to be operated by a third party, creating a permanent visitor pavilion hosting space. And then all of those strategies, as they're outlined, are provided in that report. The focus group also provided further considerations around each of these categories, as well as considerations that inform the timing of initiatives. So from the focus group recommendations on the Horseshoe Canyon Master Plan, considerations for future initiatives will be brought forward to Council during budget deliberations by administration. Financial implications around this, funds for the Horseshoe Canyon Focus Group were approved within the 2020 and 2021 budget. And then Council options, as outlined here. 1, that Council approves the report and presentation from the Horseshoe Canyon Focus Group. 2, that Council provide direction to administration for further public engagement and consultation. And the recommended motion is that Council approve the Horseshoe Canyon Focus Group report and presentation as recommended at the April 20th Committee of the Whole meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Shelby. Does council have any questions for Ms. Sherwick? Councillor Penner.
Not necessarily a question, but just a comment. I really enjoyed or appreciated having the two of the community members present it back to us at the Committee of the Whole. I really thought that was very valuable, that we didn't just have the consultants speak, that the community members did the majority of the speaking. And it came from the heart, as to say, because it came out of their discussion. So thank you for allowing them to do that.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions, concerns, comments? Councillor Christie.
Just curious how the voluntary parking fees are going.
Yes, through the Reeve, to your question, Councillor Christie, they're going, I would say overall positive so far. I've been on site with our staff training them as we're getting things going. So we did see some quite busy days over the long weekend. So I believe our counts for Saturday were 330 paid vehicles during that 11 to 5 timeline, and I think around the 150 mark for the Sunday. So that was the Saturday and the Sunday. It's been just anecdotally, it's been overall positive. We are documenting if people do, if our visitors do provide us with any comments, we do let them know that we are documenting those that will be provided in a summary report at the end of this season, and let them know, thank you very much for sharing any comments that they have. We've had a lot of positive feedback. We have had visitors donating more than the $2 fee, and we have had visitors paying for other vehicles as well. And we've had comments also from visitors saying that they're happy to see people on site that they can ask questions about the canyon. So, yes.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Yes. Oh.
Councillor Hugo, you got a question?
Yes, I was just curious, are we saying that the Horseshoe Canyon is just basically a way station on the way to Drumheller, or are we asking questions? Are they going to go into basically into the county and see other things, or are they just on their way to Drumheller? Because that's all I see is the Horseshoe Canyon is a way station. It's almost like on the way to Medicine Hat. There's a nice washroom area there where you stop. You don't pay, but you stop there and use it before you get to Medicine Hat. So I really don't see the economic benefit of us actually maintaining the stewardship of Horseshoe Canyon.
Through the Reeve, to your question, Councillor Hugo, about it being just a way station, I don't have data in front of me at this time. As I said, those comments were anecdotal from what I've heard from visitors on site. I know that we did, I believe we did ask a question when we had previously collected survey data around whether people were stopping by, if Horseshoe Canyon was their final destination for the day. That is something that we are collecting any feedback around that this season. Just anecdotally, again, from over the long weekend, I would say the majority of the visitors that I spoke with were actually stopping to hike the canyon. We did speak with some visitors who they chose not to stop when they learned about the pay parking. That was, again, anecdotally, I would say a minority. We did just allow people to turn around if that was the case, of course. And I believe, and again, anecdotally, but in our previously collected survey data that we did have people who, and we did receive questions as well from visitors over the long weekend asking about other attractions in the Drumheller area. So it is a stop for many on the way in, but again, a lot of people do choose Horseshoe Canyon, it appears from what we heard, as just a stop to come hiking, so.
Go ahead, Councillor Hugo.
Yeah, further question. Shelby, I see that like our residents pay a lot for provincial taxes for the Buffalo Jump, Lario Ferry, Tolman Bridge. Do our residents really need an extra one just specifically for our residents to be taking over Horseshoe Canyon? Like already our tax dollars go to myriad of different things for supplying, for supporting provincial parks and everything. I don't see how Horseshoe Canyon is actually benefiting our residents or ratepayers.
Deputy Reeve McGee.
I don't think that's a fair question for Shelby to have to answer, so I'll just give you my perspective. I think those are very fair questions, and people are asking those of us for sure, Jim. The reality is, right now, we have Horseshoe Canyon, and what are we doing to be responsible with that? And I think, for me, it's critical that we don't spend a lot of money providing for it without finding ways to make it an economic benefit for us, since we do have it. the ambassadors that are there collecting the paid parking are to be addressing that. And also the recommendation, as I understand it from the group, was that they become ambassadors that will be directing them with tourist information to the Kneehill area. And so that is what our visitor, our economic development officer is working on, getting that information available for that to be part of the plan we have as well. So I think those are good questions, but I do believe they've been well addressed, because we're not today discussing whether or not we should have it. We have it. So now what is what we're discussing? And I think we're doing a good job of trying to be good stewards since we do have it.
In response to the Deputy Reeve, that's granted, but why don't we put this to a referendum to the residents? Since we've had a committee, I think we can have a referendum. Election's coming up in October. I think we can have a question on the ballot whether our residents and ratepayers are willing to want to own or even be stewards of this property.
Are there any other comments or questions for Shelby? I just did the math here. Well, I mean, it's not that hard. You can do it in your head. But if you have 330 vehicles stop in on a Saturday, 150 on a Sunday, that's brought us about just about $1,000, $960 worth of paid parking. I think that's pretty good. But regardless of, it's revenue that we never received before. So I think we're headed in the right direction.
Through the Reeve, yes, that's revenue that we've never expected before, but in the last 4 years, or the 3.5 years or 4 years since we bought it, we're well over $1 million in expenses spending on this canyon. So $1,000 is 1%.
Deputy Reeve McGee.
We understand that. The decision was made prior to us being here. The decision we have to make is, what do we do now? And so I understand your concerns, and I understand there's many residents bringing those to you, Jim. The reality is that is not what we're discussing here today. And we are discussing, since we have it, what are we happy to be doing and what do we think is priorities? We're not discussing whether we should or should not have it. That's already been decided 5 years, 6 years ago. What we're deciding now is what we want to do with this report going forward to make good on what we have.
So basically, through Deputy Reeve, basically the residents don't matter in anything anymore. It's just what council decides. I'm very disappointed. I'm not impressed. I've listened to residents, and in the last 3.5 years, 4 years, I have not run into, other than council, that is in support of us owning or anything developing or even the stewardship of Horseshoe Canyon. I brought this forward countless times. I'm not too sure who the rest of council is listening to or even talking to, but I haven't run into anybody that's in support of this, because our roads, our infrastructure is more important than us owning and stewardship of a recreational property. And that's exactly what this is.
Jim, the residents, of course, do matter. And I'm speaking about residents who themselves have told me they're happy to be part of it. Residents asked to be part of the task force because they were happy to be part of it. And so I understand there's a great number that do not, but that's the hard part of a democracy. Sometimes some people aren't going to have what they want. The reality is, we're not discussing whether we should have it or not. The reality is, what do we do with it?
So I guess democracy, if the majority of the people don't want it, it doesn't matter. It's just a matter of council's wishes. Okay, fine. I understand this now.
Councillor King.
I know we're a little bit off of where maybe we were headed with this, but in response to Councillor Hugo, I don't think you've heard anyone here today say it doesn't matter what the ratepayers want, but the question I would have is, are the ratepayers that you're talking to, are they not in favor of Kneehill County supporting recreation in any way, shape, or form? Or is it specifically Horseshoe Canyon that they have a problem with? So I guess my question is it okay for the county to spend money on recreation as long as it's not attached to Horseshoe Canyon?
Councillor King, thank you for addressing me as councillor. I appreciate that. I have talked to ratepayers, and they are very questionable on any recreational spending we do make. They do ask questions, but they do see that Horseshoe Canyon is a black hole, and no matter what happens, it's never, ever going to pay for itself. And it's always going to be more tax dollars, more revenue going to keep this canyon to where our so-called committee or focus group decided to go. You know, we can't sit there and spend taxpayers' dollars on something that's never going to return us any kind of a profit or actually break even. It doesn't make any sense. I know our roads don't return us a profit, but they are also what we use to travel around, and that is what we have to do. I realize that, but this is recreational property. This is not a mandate that I think this council should be looking at. I think this council should be thinking about, you know, what is the priorities here? Horseshoe Canyon is a recreational property. It will never, ever, ever make money for the municipality. We may get some funding out of it, but it's always going to be a black hole where we're going to be spending money. And especially with that canyon, you know, we want to do more trails. We want to put signage up. We want to do this up. Like my residents and residents across the county are asking me, you know, like they see a grader go by with his blade up, you know, and he's traveling and he does 5 minutes work and then he goes back. Well, what's he doing? You know, they want to know what is going to benefit them, and this will never ever make us any kind of break even or profit. And I think council has to look at this. We may own it, but I think we have to sit there and we have to stop. I realize this is information, but we have to stop and look at what do our residents want. You know, they want the roads to be able to take them into the towns wherever they got to or on the pavement. If they have a water line, they want that in there. Is Horseshoe Canyon a benefit for this county, or is it not a benefit for the residents of this county? And I can't see it being a benefit for this county. And same with my residents and the residents out here, the ones I've talked to, and I've talked to a lot, don't see Horseshoe Canyon as a benefit.
Councillor King.
Again, Councillor Hugo, just in response to your comments, I guess I would say that the real truth about recreation is that no matter where Kneehill County is involved in recreation, there is no return to the dollars we're investing. Recreation does not make money, it costs money. However, the services that Kneehill County provides to their residents, whether it happens to be recreation, or roads, or water, or garbage, truth of the matter is the individual ratepayers probably, no, not probably, the truth of the matter is the individual ratepayers not carrying the load for any of those programs. And so whether it's your road, or whether it's your water, or whether it's your garbage, you are not paying full costs for those things. They're all being subsidized some other way through county budget. So if we're only going to do the things that make us money, or that are putting money back into our pockets at the level at which we're expending them, then we virtually wouldn't be doing most of the services that we're providing, because the individual residential ratepayer that you and I are talking to on a regular basis are not paying the bill for those services. So the question becomes, to attract business and people to an area, do you just provide the basic services, or do you provide some level of enhanced life? And the reality is, recreation is one of those things that you provide that enhances people's desire to live in areas. And I know there are a number of people who aren't happy about Horseshoe Canyon, but I also know that I've talked to individuals, ratepayers within this county, who are more than happy with the fact that we own Horseshoe Canyon. So there is a difference of opinion, and I guess the question becomes, at what point in time do we fold up our tent and say, if it ain't making money, we're not doing it? And that really becomes the question. At what level are you willing to reduce your lifestyle in order to pay for everything that you're getting? And I don't know, I don't think that most people who live in this county would say, well, quit grading my road or quit graveling my road. I don't think they're going to say, if they're on a water line, well, quit servicing that and providing me with water. There might be the odd one who's not happy with the fact that he's along adjacent to a water line. They're not going to say, quit dealing with my garbage, I'll look after it myself. So we're in the business of providing services to people. One of the things that we provide is recreation. And I guess in my mind, recreation has value. And as a counselor, I'm willing to stand behind what we're doing at Horseshoe Canyon, and I'm willing to say that it is providing value to our ratepayers. And I could introduce you to some that would be in agreement with what I'm telling you.
Thank you for that, Councillor King. I could introduce you to a lot that would be not in agreement with that, but what you're talking about is the services that we provide with grading the roads, and the water is enhanced services that we supply to residents in our municipality or our county. And Horseshoe Canyon doesn't quite fit in, it doesn't fit at all in what I see in services that we should be supplying to the municipality, because it really doesn't enhance your quality of life. If the people want to go for a walk, and I've seen people walking through the coulees, I've seen people canoeing down the river. This isn't run by the municipality. So why is it such important that we own Horseshoe Canyon to enhance the quality of life of our residents?
Councillor King.
Last comment, Councillor Hugo, that I'm going to make with regard to this is, I guess here's an area where you and I are very much in disagreement. I see Horseshoe Canyon as very much an enhancement of what Kneehill County does. You do not, and I don't know that we likely are going to agree on that. However, as I've told you before, the opinion that you express is valued and is important at this table, so I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor King.
Okay, Councillor Christie.
I guess my comment is, in my business, when I hire people, they ask about recreation, education, healthcare, transportation. All of that becomes our responsibility, and to build a community, we have to support recreation, because as Ken said, it doesn't matter what part of recreation we look at, it doesn't make money. But to hire the quality people that we need and to attract them to our community for economic development is terribly important. The spin-off value of that, I don't think is quantifiable, but it's terribly important. We're in a competition to draw people to our community that will support our community, and I think this is where it starts. And it's terribly important when I hire high-end people in my business that we have a community that the family wants to come to, not just the employee, but the family. And that's more questions on interviews are being asked about what's around me, not the job, but where am I going to bring my kids?
Okay, Councillor Penner.
I've had a few residents, I've had multiple residents tell me it's a great thing, and a few of them have told me it's such a valuable asset. They are so appreciative that the previous council had purchased this. I know it was a huge expense and whatnot else. We're talking about hikers in the coulees and whatnot else. They can go there to hike. They can't legally be on my land to hike, and it drives us crazy. So this way there is somewhere for them to go to hike, and the idea of hiring someone down there was to promote the rest of the county, whereas before there was nobody there promoting the rest of the county. They stopped this awesome, they went to Drumheller, heard nothing else about Kneehill County. Now we have people down there who are promoting Kneehill County. So the benefits I see in the future years to come, very positive.
Okay, we are dealing with the focus group. Councillor King.
I guess I would just like to thank Shelby and the focus group, the individuals who served on that focus group, bringing this information to us. I know it was a lot of work and a lot of effort went into it. So just appreciation from me to you for the work that was done and to all those who were involved. So, and with that said, I will make the motion that council approve the Horseshoe Canyon Group Focus Group report and presentation as was recommended at the April 20th Committee of the Whole meeting.
Okay. Thank you very much. We have a motion before us. Is there any discussion to that motion prior to the question being called? I guess I do have one comment specific to Horseshoe Canyon. I know with COVID, we haven't had the opportunity to do a long table supper down there, but I have had the opportunity over the years to attend that long table supper. And just speaking with the people that are there, they came from Red Deer, from Edmonton, from Medicine Hat, from Calgary. And these are people that specifically come to Horseshoe Canyon because they like Horseshoe Canyon. I spoke with one person in particular from Calgary, and she says she has 2 young children. I don't know what the age is, but they love dinosaurs and they love trekking in Horseshoe Canyon. They attend Horseshoe Canyon as many weekends out of the summer as they can possibly attend. And she told me, you guys got to make sure that there's more room for this long table supper because the opportunity is very limited for people to come and enjoy this facility the way it stands. But regardless of, we have a motion before us. Is there any discussion to the motion? Seeing not, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. Thanks, Shelby.
Thank you.
Okay, our next agenda item, 8.1, salary disclosure list. Mr. Hogan, are you going to start this?
I can introduce the item.
Very good.
Through you, Mr. Reeve, this was an item placed on the agenda by Councillor Hugo, so by way of that description, I will defer the conversation to him.
Thank you, Mr. Hogan. I was approached by several residents and ratepayers that they would like to see a salary disclosure of anybody over $100,000 in the municipality. They do see the budget, but they do not really get an idea of what some of our senior management or administration is making. It's just a transparency that our ratepayers would like to see. And I do see that, Mr. Hogan did come up with the philosophy of the position of the county at 50 percentile market. They weren't asking for how they determine what and how much our administration makes. What they were asking for is transparency. And I think as residents and ratepayers, they have a right to ask these questions. I believe that I have heard that if they do submit through the municipal affairs, through a FOIP information, they can't get this information. So perhaps it would be better for council to preempt this and actually show exactly how much, like our $100,000 and more, what our administration is actually making. It's transparency. I think it'll maybe alleviate a little bit of the questions. It may not, it may bring more questions to us, but that's basically our job as council to basically to support our administration. And, you know, I don't see any harm to it. AHS has submitted and has printed a list out of all their employees that are making over $100,000 a year. So I do realize other counties do not do this. So, but our residents don't live in other counties, and they're not asking the other counties. They're asking Kneehill County Council as itself to print this list out.
Councillor King.
So Councillor Hugo, I guess I'm looking for some more information in terms of what's driving the request. So the awareness of the fact that Kneehill County is paying its employees at sort of the 50 percentile. So we're paying our employees about half of what the top end ones are. Well, that's not quite right. Yeah, we're at the sort of, if you compared us to other counties, there's going to be 5 that are paying their employees more than us, and there's going to be 5 that are paying their employees less than us. So that information to show that we're situated in the middle of the marketplace is not adequate. People actually feel that they need to know what individuals are making as opposed to the fact that they're in the middle of the market. Is it really that important that they know that employee A, B, C, and D are making X, Y, and Z? Or is it just important to know that Kneehill County is compensating their employees at a fair rate and that we're in the middle of the marketplace? That's not enough information?
Councillor King, no, that's not enough information because they don't have a clue what the other municipalities are paying their administration. They'd like to know because all they get is a ballpark figure on wages, on planning, economic development. They just get a ballpark figure. They would like to know exactly what some of our employees are making. And I don't think it's a wrong request because the ratepayers are the ones that are paying the bills for everything. I think they have a right to know. It is taxpayer funded, it is public dollars that the county is getting. And I think the ratepayers have a right to know exactly how much they're making because the 50% doesn't really tell them much of anything because they don't know what any other municipality is paying their administration.
Councillor Penner.
Just a comment. I don't believe this is necessary to be put out there. Here some time ago, there was a bit of a review done on it and gone to market value. But if somebody has an issue with a certain employee and they don't feel like they're doing their job appropriately and they think they're making a lot of money, well, they should report them to the CAO and have a discussion. I think that's, in my opinion, that's maybe what's driving this. I'm not 100% sure, but I don't believe that we need to individually state everybody's wage.
Councillor Penner, I'm not asking everybody's individual wage. I'm asking for $100,000 or more. If AHS and the Alberta government is willing to print the list up of everybody that, and yeah, there was a little bit of a backlash, and yeah, and I think the residents and the taxpayers have a right to know exactly what the administration is making. I think they have that right.
Councillor Christie.
I guess where we see this is in our budget deliberations. And when I look at the budget and I look at the percentage of dollars that we spend on employment, I also go back through other municipalities around us. to make sure that we're competitive. We have one employee, and I have a faith in him that when I look at those comparison numbers from other counties, we're in that close to the 50% part of the market, and I believe that's adequate information for me.
Councillor Christie, yeah, I don't see a problem with that, but also our residents don't live in the other municipalities and they have really no idea what the other municipalities are paying their administration. So is it that much of a stretch to post what our administration is making, those that are making over $100,000 a year? Like this is clarity and this is transparency on behalf of the municipality to our residents and our ratepayers.
I don't just necessarily look at the numbers that the other counties are paying. I'm looking at their total budget numbers, so that when I look at their tax revenue versus the money that they spend on wages is generally higher than ours, the ones that I've looked at around us. And that's what I look at. The same thing in my own business. For every bushel of barley I produce, I want to make sure that I'm the best competitive producer of that product. It's the same thing as the county. If we don't look at it in a business view, it's not going to work. And that's, as council, I believe that's our responsibility. And I'm not sure the transparency of the high-end salary, I don't think is necessary.
Thank you, Councilor Christie.
Okay, what are council's wishes? Councilor King.
Councillor Hugo, just an additional question or comment. I'm curious, is this request you feel being driven more by idle curiosity, or is there an agenda or something that's driving the request that either you are not verbalizing or the people requesting that information from you are not verbalizing?
I don't believe there's an agenda. They saw the budget this year and they saw their property taxes go up. But granted, property taxes do have to go up eventually because we all do understand the inflation rate. But when we discuss wages, we see wages are a huge part of the budget. And there is no transparency basically in the municipality on our wages. We do know what each individual, like what each branch is making for wages, but we do, the residents are asking me, how come we can't show what some of our senior administrators are making? It's not anything different than running your own business where, you know what every employee makes, or as Councillor Christie says, like he wants to be the best. Yes, but you don't really know exactly what your competitor is making or how much he's using to produce that crop unless he posts it. And this is just something that the residents that have been asking me for is transparency. And I don't see a problem with this. I don't see a problem. I see that there is no agenda. I don't think they're going to come back on the municipality. I think they just want to know, because all we get in the budget is a ballpark figure. And with taxes going up, we have a $1.3 million shortfall. People are asking questions. We're doing fine financially, but all of a sudden we have a $1.3 million shortfall. Well, a lot of them are asking the questions, how does this make sense?
Deputy Reeve McGee.
Councillor Hugo, I also have a question along the same lines. I'm interested why the transparency needs to be that detailed. There is transparency. It's not detailed as you're suggesting. And I'm comparing it when I think about, we tell you how much it costs for administrating this building, which includes photocopying, paper, pens, tape, phone calls, all those things, and that's lumped into one little thing. And so I'm really concerned if we set a standard of itemizing things, we are going to start politicizing people's details of those things, and I don't think those need to be politicized. They need to be transparent enough for people to be able to make a good vote. And I think then after that, they trusted us to go through that information, and we have shared that information quite a bit when we came to the 50 percentile decision. That was a long and hearty discussion that we had as a group over more than one meeting. So I think that's where my question is. Where is this different than itemizing the office supplies? I don't understand the purpose for it, I guess.
Well, it's the residents that are asking me, and I don't see the harm in it either. It's transparency on, you know, like we talk about paper supplies. Well, those are basically finite things. We know what the cost is. Our employees in the administration, they have, you know, like even if it's 50% here and 50% there, the residents want to know if we are getting the value for the dollar that we are paying. It's no different than when you frequent a business or you start your own business. It's transparency. They just want to know where and how much we are paying senior administrators or anybody who's making over $100,000 a year. You know, it's hard for me to put into words sometimes. I have talked to many residents about it, and it's very difficult for them, but they would like transparency because it's just a ballpark figure in our budget on wages. We've had the discussion on 50%, but I still don't, you know, I don't know what other municipalities are paying their employees. So basically, as a counselor, I really don't have a clue whether I'm getting value for dollar either. And the residents want to know they are getting value for dollar. It's not an unreasonable request anytime that you are paid by public dollars.
Oops, sorry, Deputy Reeve McGee.
Again, Mr. Hugo and Councillor Hugo, I'm still struggling with that because yes, we do know what the other counties are doing in enough capacity to have made that decision we made less than 2 years ago, if I recall correctly. We thoroughly discussed all kinds of information. It was publicly discussed. I think there has been opportunity to understand that. And I think revisiting something that we put that much labor into is not good use of stewardship money neither. And so there has to be a balance of when do we get into the details, and because there is a good reason for it, and that justifies the cost and the money and those details, including the politicizing of those details. And when is it that we're saying, you know what, we did do that, and if they miss that information, we can find the meeting for them to see it again. So I just find this to be more detailed. I believe you have been given all that information. And if, for me anyhow, I feel as though I've been informed very sufficiently to come to that conclusion that we did 2 years ago.
Through the Deputy Reeve, how do you figure this politicizing it? You don't know what my affiliation is. You have no idea. This isn't politicizing. This is transparency on behalf of the ratepayers and residents of Kneehill County wanting to know what and exactly how much we are paying to administration. It's not an unreasonable request. I can't see it is. You say we talk, well, I don't know what Starland is paying their senior management. I have no idea what Three Hills is paying their senior management. I have no idea what Red Deer County is paying their senior management. So why is it so hard for Kneehill County to want to post these? It seems like we fight everything that residents want with transparency. We always talk, we're so transparent. Well, we're not. This is their right to know. They are ratepayers in this county and this municipality, including me, takes money from the taxpayer to do a job. And if we don't want to post this stuff, you know, I see that Kneehill County is hiding something. You know, and we're not transparent.
We are mandated through the MGA and through our audited financial statement to disclose the remuneration for divisional counselors. We are mandated to do our CAO. But there's a reason we're not mandated to do the rest of them, because I do believe people have the right to privacy. I am fine with my financial statement or my revenue income being posted on the financial audit, and I'm sure our CAO is fine with it. But I do not believe that we have staff that would like to see their wages posted any place other than Revenue Canada. So anyway, we do have had some discussion on this. Is somebody prepared to make a motion? Councillor Penner.
Thank you, Councillor Hugo, for bringing your ratepayer concerns forward and a great discussion. I'd like to make the motion that Council accept the discussion for information.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion before us to accept the discussion for information as presented. Is there any discussion to that motion? Seeing not, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Sorry, Councillor Hugo, were you opposed or in favor?
I'm in favor.
All right, unanimous. Thank you. Next agenda item, 8.2. Mr. Hogan, you're going to start this one off?
Yes, through you, Mr. Reeve. This item, similar to the last one, was requested to be placed on the agenda by Councillor Hugo. So this is regarding the county's tendering practices, or tendering review practices, I should say. And so at this point, I will turn the discussion over to Councillor Hugo.
Thank you, Mr. Hogan. Once again, I was approached by certain residents and ratepayers as they are questioning me on the tendering process of major contracts being offered by the county. That basically the administration is the only one that sees it. I see it's a little disingenuous of Mr. Hogan to put that that council would not be able to see the infrastructure or large quantity services renewed by engineering consultants. Council can see these same things. They're just asking how come staff is the only one, administration is the only one that tenders these contracts, and why do these contracts not come over the council's desk? And if it's because we don't know enough, well, that's part of what we're elected for, is we learn, we know. We can still do everything that Mr. Hogan said for you know, the quantity services. We can still review these things, but I think they should be vetted by council. And I've had many ratepayers ask me that question. How come it just goes through administration and doesn't come to council?
Well, I'll try to respond to that by stating that council sets the budget. If the tenders come in over budget, then it does come back to council. But as long as it's within budget, we've ultimately approved the project. I know when these tenders come in, they are reviewed by engineering firms, ones that we hire, to make sure that everything is in those tenders, that they haven't overlooked anything there. And before there's even a tender awarded, they are vetted quite rigorously. And I've seen some of the contracts, and they are pages and pages long of stuff that needs to be done. And I don't have the ability to determine whether or not everything is covered in there, because that is done through the engineering firms.
Question for the Reeve. Why have you seen the contracts and the rest of council hasn't?
I've seen the contracts, not in this term, but previously.
No, I've just been asked by residents, is they're questioning that, that the council should actually have a say in the tendering of contracts. I realize they are vetted by engineering firms. I'm not even sure which engineering firms we use. I know we've used the same one for the past few years. There are other engineering firms. I've talked to the town of Three Hills when they did the water plant. They didn't pick the engineering firm by AUMA. They went to a different engineering firm. It's a question by residents asking me, how come council, it may be in the budget, but how come council does not have an opportunity or even to look at the tendering contracts?
So would you like to see the bids?
We
Or do you
could,
wanna
yes,
see the
possibly through the
complete contract
yes,
with
we
all
could see
the-
the bids, but you could redact the names. I would like that the council takes a more active role in the tendering contracts, because I am accountable to the residents. Unfortunately, I don't, staff is staff, but I'm accountable to the residents that live out here, and they ask me these questions. And I can't answer these questions because I've never seen a contract being tendered. We could redact the names, we could look through them, and we could still take the engineering reports, we could still take the recommendations from our maintenance supervisor, whatever. But I think it wouldn't hurt that council has an opportunity to review these contracts.
Councillor Penner.
Early on, after I was elected, I attended a course to do with in the weeds, as to say. And to me, what we're asking here is getting into the weeds. We approve the budget, and it has to come back to us if they go over budget. But as far as I'm concerned, this is I know it's big dollars and it's ratepayer dollars, but to me, this is getting into the weeds, in which they mentioned to us that it's hard to know, to not be in the weeds when you're one of those ratepayers. So to me, this is in the weeds for sure, and I don't want to be there.
Thank you, Councillor Penner. I think in the weeds is more day-to-day operations. With tendering of multi-million-dollar contracts, I think that council has a responsibility to the residents to be able to say, yeah, we vetted the contracts, we understood, we looked at what the recommendations were from our road supervisors or maintenance supervisor, whatever supervisor it is, tendering these contracts, and we've had the opportunity. And right now, I don't have a clue how to respond to residents that ask me, well, why did this tendering contract go out? It's in the weeds. This is a budget process, but I think council has a responsibility to vet these contracts. I think they should be looking at these, even if it's just brought in a closed session or brought in where we have an opportunity to look at these things and get the recommendations from our administration. It's just another step, another what we as councilors. And I can't answer any of my ratepayers when they ask me, well, how come this contract was this and how come this contract? I don't know, because I don't have a clue, because I have never seen the contract. I have no idea what was tendered or what was asked for. I don't see any of that. So how am I supposed to answer my ratepayers?
Councillor Christie.
I believe that we do have the opportunity to discuss major tendered projects when the budget's being built and presented both in camera and out of camera, that those projects are discussed in the budget discussion, and that if they go over, they come back to us. We give a guideline of how high we'll go, and if it goes over that, then when it's brought back to us. But for sure, the major projects are discussed in the budget part of the discussion for 4 months before the budget's passed. So I believe that we're vetting individual projects on their merits and what is anticipated it's going to cost when the budget's built. If it goes over, it's brought back to us, and I believe that's adequate.
Deputy Reeve McGee.
I agree that our residents need to have their questions answered when they ask them. And I think the key is to understand who answers which questions. And for me, those are the details of administration, so our CAO would have to answer those questions, not you. And so I think, for me, I have called on my CEO to ask, you know, is this for me to answer? Is this for somewhere else to go? He has been excellent at helping me understand those kinds of questions that come to me. And I suggest that maybe that might be a way to address this as well. I also wanted just to say thank you, Councillor Penner. I agree that this, for me, I see it as in the weeds, and that's what I was trying to refer to also in our prior topic, that this is part of the details that we hire qualified people to deal with these issues, because there's immense amount of regulations federally, provincially, and so forth in both of these things, and I'm not about to learn all that, and nor are we asked to.
Yes, Mr. Hogan.
Through you, Mr. Reeve, just as part of this, I'd like to clear up what I believe is a misinterpretation of the request for decision that I put together. In my statement where I say the recommendations received from those consulting engineers would not change whether council or administration were conducting the review, that was not stated out there as that those recommendations would not come to council. That was put in there as at the end, that whether the tender is being awarded by council or awarded by administration, the recommendations from the engineers are not going to change regarding who that should be awarded to. So when the tender is put out for bid, you're entering into, now you're getting into legalities, you're getting into contract A and contract B type of situations, which are standing legal processes. So the review of those tenders and the award of them is governed by purchasing law, both within the internal to the county through a procurement policy and in a broader context through New West Partnership Trade, Canada Free Trade, if they meet certain thresholds as an example. And so what we outline is the criteria upon which that tender or request for proposals or whatever that procurement process is going to be determined upon is based upon what's put out in the tender itself or in the request for proposals, and has to be weighed against those legally. So for a number of our projects, when it's reviewed by the engineering firm, that's reviewed with that legislation in mind. It's reviewed based on the criteria put out in the initial procurement documents. For the most part, it's not always the case, but for the most part, that's the lowest compliant tender. We'll get that, so that's reviewed for compliancy, and then a recommendation is made. So in most cases, so for our road programs or things like that, in most cases, it's going to be the lowest compliant tender. And so when the engineer is making that recommendation, having verified that the tenders are compliant, whether that recommendation is coming to administration or coming to council, it's going to be the exact same recommendation. And so it's not that administration is keeping that information from council, it's that there's nothing that changes what that information is. And so when administration looks at this, we're saying if there's nothing that's going to change that recommendation, if we're bound by purchasing law, if the politicization of that process would create legal problems potentially if council was trying to move outside of those legislation, then the question is why incorporate a delay to bring those questions back to council when they can be handled in a more efficient manner at lower cost to the taxpayer by moving them expeditiously through the process, if we're bound to the purchasing law and the policy anyway. But I did want to clarify that one component is that the engineers don't care who that recommendation is coming back to. It's not going to change what that recommendation is. They'll give the same one to us as that would come to council if council was reviewing these. We're still going to be bound by purchasing law and getting into contract A and contract B type situations. And as council has outlined, if a project is coming in over budget, we're under the obligation to come back to council before moving forward with that project anyway.
Well, thank you for that information, Mr. Hogan. And you're right, some of these tenders are time sensitive. If they're gonna start working, should they wait 2 weeks or a week and a half between council meetings before there's the ability to just move ahead with the tender? As far as I can tell, we do the budgeting. If it comes in under the budget number, it can be awarded by administration. If it doesn't, then it comes back to council. And we look at further information and determine why. So anyway, we are, Councillor Keever, did you have your hand up or are you scratching your eye again?
Yeah, yes, I did. I think part of the problem here, Councillor Hugo, is that people are, if it isn't brought back to council, people are feeling that maybe administration is showing preference to one person or brand or something. And it kind of comes from when you look at a tender contract down at the bottom, it says the lowest will not necessarily be chosen. And so it's left up to the administration to decide who is going to be the one chosen, even though they aren't necessarily the lowest. Many years ago, when I drove a school bus, the school bus tenders went out and it said right at the bottom, GM dealers only need apply. Now that was a case where, yes, it should be back to the council to make the decision. But if we don't feel that, you know, I mean, there's preferential treatment being given here, I don't know that we need to look at all of them.
Yes, Councillor King.
Councillor Hugo, I'm looking for some more clarification in terms of what's driving the request. I guess the question I'm asking is familiarity with the process and the legalities and all the constraints that go around tendering documents and awareness of that. So do you feel that there would be value in having a primer on how that works, or just sort of a information document provided to council in terms of the steps of the process? And would that be of value to you in your job as a councillor to be able to explain that process to your ratepayers? I guess I'm not sure what's driving the request that you're making, but I'm trying to figure out how we can help you in your job, your role as a councillor, and would that be something that you see value in or not?
Thank you, Councillor King. Yeah, no, I see value in information on the process. A lot of them see